Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Zoom service of Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. UUCC is a congregation that fosters personal and spiritual growth through religious exploration in search of the truth while celebrating diversity and affirming the worth and dignity of every person. We're so glad that you're joining us. I'm Danielle Lyon, and this is Thomas Lyon, your worship coordinators. Our speaker today is Nancy Reed. Nancy has been a member of UUCC since she moved to Canandaigua more than 20 years ago. She had grown up a Unitarian near Washington, D.C. Then, as an adult raising a family in Pennsylvania, Nancy had stopped going to a UU church because there wasn't one nearby. She moved here in 1998, visited UUCC, and realized from her first visit what she had been missing. The hymns that day and Carl Tichenor's words made her feel she had come home again. We have a few announcements for you today. You might have noticed that we managed to get some music for the beginning of the service. And one idea that we had for the rest of the summer is if anybody is musical and wouldn't mind sharing their talents for opening music as we gather or during the joys and sorrows to fill in a little bit of that space as we think and type, please email Thomas, tflyon@gmail.com and let us know. Or if you have a recommendation for some music that you would like us to share, we'll try to continue that for the rest of the summer. If any of you checked your weather rocks yesterday, you might have noticed that there was rain and lots of it. That means, unfortunately, we had to postpone the Walk for Migrant Justice down at Kershaw Park. The good news is that our rain date is this morning, so you still have the opportunity to join and walk with us. We'll be meeting over by the Boat Launch, Dog Beach, Twisted Rail Brewing Company side of Kershaw Park, gathering between 11:30 and probably about 11:45 before we actually start walking. And then we'll travel to the pier and back again. When we get back about 12:30, we will have the opportunity for a bring your own everything picnic and fellowship in the park right by where we started. And our last announcement for today is that there will be a cleanup trying to get the church ready for us to come back in person this fall. There are several scheduled coming up. The first is Thursday evening from 5 to 7 p.m. and that's going to be hosted by Jeff and Gigi. So every day, taking a couple steps closer to coming back together again. Now we will enter a space of worship.
Hi, I'm Nancy Reed, and I am so delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to light this chalice today. I'll sort of get to it slowly in case you want to go grab one. If you're like me, you sometimes forget to the last minute, but I'm going to light this chalice. If my lighter behaves itself. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever felt as strongly connected to the web of life here on our planet as I have over the past 2 years. With our worldwide experience of COVID, all humans everywhere are sharing the same struggles and fears and threats to so much that we had just taken for granted. And the threats to our natural world have felt so much closer to home too. I know You are aware of the pandemic of gypsy moths and ash borers that have taken so many of our trees here in our part of New York. Now, I don't mean to equate the deaths of our fellow humans with the deaths of trees, but just to point out our connectedness. And it's just that connectedness and talking about trees that's at the heart of the writings of the two women I want to talk about today. The first one is Hope Jaren. She's written this book, which I guess may be backwards on your screen, but it's called Lab Girl. Hope Jaren is a geobiologist. She has spent her life studying trees, flowers, seeds, and soil. In her book, Lab Girl, she invites us to join her. Hope Jaren starts out saying, look at the green around you. Look at a tree. Look at a leaf, or imagine one. Now ask a question about your leaf. What shade of green is it? Is the top different from the bottom? Is it limp, wrinkled? Is it edible? How much sun does it get? How much water hits it? She says, guess what? You are now a scientist. People will tell you you have to know math to be a scientist, or physics or chemistry. They're wrong. What comes first is a question, and you're already there. So let me tell you some stories, one scientist to another. And my second scientist and storyteller is Robin Wall Kimmerer. Her book is Braiding Sweetgrass. She's an environmental biologist, a researcher, and SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental Biology. She lives in Fabius, New York, and most of the biology she writes about is right here in our backyard. She's also a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, and that native heritage is the lens through which she sees the world. I enjoyed these books so much because of the stories in them, and I hope you will too. And now through the magic of Zoom recordings, we get to hear Bill Mells, and we will do our first hymn, which is For the Beauty of the Earth.
We are a community that holds one another in celebration and in pain. Please share your joys and sorrows in the chat box in Zoom, and know that whatever is in your heart that you hold today, we are with you. We hold close celebrations of milestones, people visiting, people going on to other places. Much needed rain in some places, too much rain in others. All of these things we hold close, and those that we're not sure today, you hold close as well.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts support our church in its work. That work is summarized in our covenant. The covenant for UUCC says, in service of the values that unite us, we will recognize the inherent value of each person, foster a community of compassion and caring for all, value our diverse opinions, and engage respectfully in all interactions. If you would like to give to this morning's offering, you can give online at canandaiguauu.org/connect or physically by mailing a check to the church. In either case, note if you'd like your gift to go toward the Sunday offering or your pledge. We'll share 25% of it with our monthly Sunday offerings with our service partner. Our service partner this month is The Spot, run by our own Sarah Chilson. They provide free school supplies, clothing, shoes, and personal care items and food to support children in need right here in Canandaigua. They believe that we can help children reach their full potential in and out of the classroom by providing for those basic needs. As an opportunity to get to know our service partner more deeply, Please consider joining the spot on Saturday, July 24th to help with their annual backpack distribution. You can sign up to help with a link that we'll post in the chat and share it privately with your friends, but please don't post it publicly like on Facebook.
Hi. Well, these are some words from Hope Jaren again. So I ask you to get comfortable and treat this sort of as a guided meditation into what it is like, if you can imagine, what it is like to be an acorn. You are an acorn and you know how to wait. You've been waiting more than a year since you dropped from that oak tree. You've been waiting for just the right day, just the right amount of moisture and sunlight, just the right temperature. You'll only have one chance to grow, and this is the day. You've been curled up inside a hard shell that protected you, but now it's time to begin to break through and begin to stretch. Your first root pushes through the tiny crack in the shell of your acorn. The job of your root at first is to anchor you in place. It pushes down into the ground and holds on. This is the place you will live for the rest of your life. You won't be able to move from here to anywhere warmer or wetter or less dangerous. This is your patch of soil. Your root goes down before your stem grows up, so you won't be getting any new food from the sunlight above, not for days or even weeks. And sending down your root to look for water uses up all the food you had stored in your seed. But you are lucky, and your root finds the water it needs to grow. This first root gets fat and grows down and then sends out smaller roots in all directions. They will help keep you from tipping over when you grow up. And they will connect you to the roots of other plants nearby and will be able to signal to each other. All of your roots will take up more space than all of your leaves put together and will drink up gallons of water every day for years. And if anything happens to your trunk and branches, you can grow back again with just one good root. Now join me for a few moments of silence, and then we'll sing Spirit of Life.
I'm going to have a short argument with my computer because I see a screen, but it says that sharing it is invalid. Hopefully this works out.
So, Lab Girl is the name of the book, and it's a memoir that Hope Jaren has written. Hope alternates stories of her life and coming of age as a scientist with chapters about the cycle of trees and flowers. I just told you the first of her stories, the one about the beginnings of an oak tree as an acorn. And then she writes about her own beginnings. She says, "There's nothing in the world more perfect than a slide rule. I grew up in my father's laboratory and played beneath the chemical benches until I was tall enough to play on them. My father taught 42 consecutive years worth of introductory physics and earth science in that laboratory, nestled within a community college deep in rural Minnesota. He loved his lab, and it was a place that I loved also." Hope always just assumed that when she grew up, she would have her own lab, and she worked and studied hard to get there. It was early on, when she was still a student, that she learned the importance of observation and curiosity, the kind of things that she pointed out to us earlier about what you need to do to be a scientist, be curious. It was when she was working on her doctoral thesis. She had spent all summer observing hackberry trees growing in her area out west to analyze how their berries developed at different temperatures. But the trees didn't cooperate. They didn't flower or fruit that summer at all. And she realized she had been so focused on what the trees had not been doing that she hadn't made any observations on what they had been doing. As a result, a new mindset became imperative to her. Maybe with hard work and the wonderful machines, chemicals, techniques, and tools of a modern laboratory, she could do hard science and study what it's like to be a plant. She could learn to see the world as plants do, put herself in their place, and puzzle out how they work. After she writes a chapter about meeting the man she would marry, there's a chapter on plant sex. She says, "All sex involves touch. The living tissues of two separate individuals must come into contact and then attach. Well, contacting and attaching to another individual is a big problem for plants. They're anchored in place, and their survival depends upon their immobility. Nevertheless, the vast majority of plants faithfully produce a new crop of flowers every single year, fulfilling their half of the reproductive bargain, even though the odds of these flowers eventually becoming fertilized are small. As much and much more than 99.9% of pollen produced in the world goes absolutely nowhere and fertilizes nothing. Some trees, like maples, dogwoods, fruit trees, spread their pollen on every kind of fly or beetle, luring them near with sweet nectar, but providing only enough for a brief taste. You've got to get them on their way. In contrast, elm, birch, oak, walnut, pine, spruce trees, as well as the grasses, all release their pollen to the wind. It goes farther than it would by insect, but never as directly to another flower. Wind-borne pollen travels for miles and then rains down indiscriminately, but enough of it hits its target to keep the world perpetually blanketed by the great forests." And then she talks about how her life as an academic scientist is ruled by the realities of needing a budget, the constant struggle to get the funding she needs for her lab to survive. So she talks about how trees must budget too in order to survive. She describes the life of a small maple tree, not a majestic maple in the forest, but a demure decorative one on your street, maybe. Maple trees are the first to bud in the spring. Every year, from March to July, it must grow an entire new canopy of leaves. Looking up, you'll notice that the leaves at the top of any tree are smaller, on average, than the leaves at the bottom. Did you ever notice that? I'm looking now. This allows sunlight to get through to the base whenever the wind blows and parts the upper branches. If you look again, and you'll notice that the leaves low in the canopy are of a darker green color. They contain more of the pigment that helps each leaf absorb sunshine, allowing them to harvest the weaker rays that penetrate the shade. When building foliage, a tree must budget for each leaf individually and allocate for each position relative to the other leaves. A good business plan will allow our tree to triumph as the largest and longest living thing on your street. But it ain't easy to survive. Hope Jaren has survived. She has built 3 academic labs so far. First one was at Georgia Tech, then one at Johns Hopkins, and now one at the University of Hawaii. She calls her science curiosity-based science, answering questions about what it's like to be a plant. And with that, she has won 3 Fulbrights and is the author of 7 scientific studies answering questions about the world we depend upon. And my second book, which may be more familiar to some of you, is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin begins her book with the creation story of the Onondagas, and you've probably heard a version of this story before, but here again is the story of Sky Woman. In the beginning was Sky World. She fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a tiny bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of the wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she had ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather, loons, otters, swans, beavers, and fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest on. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far even for Loon, and after a long while, she surfaced with nothing to show for her efforts. One by one, other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depth and the darkness and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of the swimmers. They returned gasping for air with their heads ringing, and some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go, while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long, a stream of bubbles rose, but with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. And then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put the mud on my back. I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the mud. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks, from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made, not by Sky Woman alone, though, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts coupled with her deep gratitude. And like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the home in Sky World, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants. These she scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from Sky World, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines spread everywhere. And now that the animals too had plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island. And Robin says, on one side of the world were people whose relationship with the living world was shaped by Sky Woman, who created a garden for the well-being of all. On the other side was another woman with a garden and a tree. But for tasting its fruit, she was banished from the garden, and the gates clanged shut behind her. That mother of man was made to wander in the wilderness and earn her bread by the sweat of her brow, not by filling her mouth with the sweet fruits that bend the branches low. In order to eat, she was instructed to subdue the wilderness into which she was cast. Our creation stories. They are in every culture, and they're a source of identity and orientation to the world. And we are inevitably shaped by them, no matter how distant they may be from our consciousness, whether it's the native stories of our heritage or the biblical stories of our heritage. Robin gives many examples, though, of the lessons from the Sky Woman story. And the strongest imperatives to her are gratitude for the abundance of the earth, generosity, and responsibility to the beings of the earth. She learned her words of gratitude early. Her earliest memories, she says, are tent camping every summer in the Adirondacks with her family. She tells how every morning, first thing, her father would make coffee on the Coleman stove. She describes him in his red checked shirt, standing atop the rocks above whatever lake they were near, lifting the coffee pot from the stove. And even as a little girl, she knew it was time to pay attention. Her father would hold the top of the coffee pot in place with a folded pot holder and pour coffee on the ground in a thick brown stream. And he would say, "Here's to the gods of Forked Lake, or South Pond, or Tahawis, which is Mount Marcy, or wherever they were that day." This sunrise service was Robin's Potawatomi way of sending gratitude into the world. But many Native peoples, despite myriad cultural differences, have this in common. They are rooted in cultures of gratitude. Thanksgiving ceremonies are at the beginning of any native gathering, and if you've been to Ganondagan, you may have heard them. Near Robin's family farm is a Haudenosaunee Elementary School. Here the school week begins and ends not with the Pledge of Allegiance, but with the Thanksgiving address, which is just a river of words as old as the people themselves, known more accurately in the Onondagan language as the words that came before all else. Even the youngest of the kids in this school learn this, and there are 18 stanzas to this Thanksgiving address, each one naming and thanking something specific. The faces of the people around us, our Mother Earth, the waters and fish life and plant life and berries, trees and animals, birds and winds, stars, sun and moons. And then each stanza ends with, and now our minds are one. The second lesson from the Sky Woman's story is the generosity of the animals that work together to help Sky Woman survive. And Robin tells of the generosity of the trees. She says there is a map of bioregions, a map of our country divided into bioregions. In this map, state boundaries disappear and are replaced by ecological regions, defined by the leading inhabitants of that region, the iconic beings who shape the landscape and influence our daily lives and feed us. This map shows the Salmon Nation of the Pacific Northwest and the Pinyon Nation of the Southwest, among others. We here in the Northeast, you might even guess, are in the embrace of the Maple Nation. She writes, it is March, the Anishinaabe New Year, the maple sugar moon, and I've gone maple sugaring. Here it is, she's thinking, almost tax day in this country, when my fellow humans are getting ready to make their contribution to the well-being of the community. You know, but the maples have been giving all year long. Their contribution of limb wood kept my old neighbor's house warm all winter when he couldn't pay the oil bill. The volunteer fire department and ambulance squad in my town rely on maple syrup contributions to their monthly pancake breakfast to raise funds for a new engine. The trees make a real dent in the energy bill for the school with their shade in the summer. And thanks to the canopies of the maples, no one I know pays for air conditioning here. They donate shade to the Memorial Day Parade every year. And without even being asked, if it weren't for the maples' ability to break the wind, the highway department would have to plow snowdrifts off the road twice as often. We haven't even mentioned how they create habitat for songbirds and wildlife, golden leaves to shuffle through, tree forts and branches for swings. Centuries of their falling leaves have built this soil, now farmed for strawberries, apples, corn, and hay. How much of the oxygen in our valley comes from our maples? How much carbon is taken from the atmosphere and stored away? These processes are what ecological scientists term ecosystem services, the structures and functions of the natural world that make life possible. We can assign an economic value to maple timber or gallons of maple syrup, but ecosystem services are far more precious. And yet, as with the services of local governments, we don't think about them unless they're missing. There's no official tax system to pay for these eco services as we pay for snow plowing and school books. We get them for free, donated continually by maple trees. They do their share for us, but the question is, how do we repay them? Which brings up the third lesson from the creation story, which is our responsibility to each other. and to our planet. The Oath of Citizenship for the United States stipulates that citizens will defend the nation against all enemies and take up arms if they're called to do so. If that same oath held in Maple Nation, the trumpet call would be echoing through these wooded hills. Maples of the U.S. face a grave enemy. The most highly regarded models predict that the climate of New England will become hostile to sugar maples within 50 years. Rising temperatures will reduce seedling success and regeneration will thereby start to fail. It already is failing. Insects will follow, and the oaks will get the upper hand. Imagine New York or New England without maple trees. A brown fall instead of hills on fire. It's running threat that you hear from people on the left and the right. You know, people say, if things don't change, I'm moving to Canada. It looks like the maples may have to do just that. To survive, they must migrate northward to the boreal fringe. Our energy policy is forcing them to leave. They'll be exiled from their homelands for the price of cheap gas. Our English language doesn't give us the tools really for incorporating respect for other living beings, respect for animacy. In English, you're either a human or a thing. But in native languages, pronouns used for humans and all other animate things are the same, and they mean something that is a being, not an it. An animal is not referred to as an it, but neither is a tree or grass or an apple. In Potawatomi, rocks are even animate, as are mountains and water and fire and places. Beings that are imbued with spirit, like sacred medicines, sacred songs, drums, even stories, are all animate, not referred to as it. And native elders give the advice, you should go among the standing people, which is the trees. You should go among the standing people, or go spend some time with those beaver people. Imagine walking through a richly inhabited world of birch people, bear people, rock people, beings worthy of respect. Imagine the possibilities. Imagine the responsibilities. Imagine the access we would have to different perspectives, the things we might see through other eyes. We don't have to figure out everything ourselves. There are intelligences other than our own, say the native wise men, teachers all around us. And imagine how much less lonely the world would be. It's true both books contain serious concerns about our future on this earth, but they also both have the power to help us to be curious, to feel connected to other living beings, and to care. They write about what is at risk. With beauty and humor and passion, they continue to lecture. These two women continue to lecture and teach, and so personally share their passion with many. Both authors have a couple of simple requests. In her epilogue, Hope asks each of us to plant a tree a year if you own your own property, or find a way to plant one on someone else's. And at a talk I went to by Robin Wall Kimmerer a couple of years ago, she asked us at the end of the talk to mow our grass less, leave a little bit more habitat for the other beings out there. We can do that. And now we'll sing our final hymn and homage to this world of ours, Blue Boat Home.
casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue
Just a short poem by a poet I've come to love named Chelan Harkin. So she would say, go out among the standing people. But her poem is called Magic Show. Cancel everything. Cancel everything. Go sit in your yard. Make sunshine a priority. Turn your to-do list into whatever happens next. That's when the universe invites you to her magic show of exactly what is. Thank you for being here today. I will extinguish our chalice and say our words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.